Amelia Thornwell stood at the edge of the village square, her hands trembling as she clutched the worn fabric of her grey dress, watching the townspeople cross to the other side of the street rather than walk near her. She had become a ghost among the living, a woman so despised that mothers would pull their children close and whisper warnings when she passed. The fire that consumed the east wing of Ashford Manor 2 years ago had taken 37 lives, servants and guests alike, and every single person in the county of Derbyshire believed she was responsible. The magistrate had called it negligence. The newspapers had called it murder, and Amelia had no voice left to defend herself. The wound in her heart never healed because guilt, even when undeserved, has a way of burrowing deep. She lived now in a groundskeeper's abandoned cottage at the far edge of the Ashford estate, a place so isolated that even the wind seemed reluctant to visit. Her hands bore the permanent scars of that terrible night, the night she had tried desperately to save as many souls as she could before the flames consumed everything. But no one remembered her attempts at heroism. They only remembered the accusations, the testimonies, the condemning evidence that painted her as the careless governess who left a candle burning in the library. Amelia risked losing not just her reputation, but her very will to continue living. Each morning, she woke wondering if this would be the day she simply stopped trying, stopped fighting the crushing weight of a crime she did not commit. The village shopkeeper refused to sell her bread. The vicar would not meet her eyes during Sunday service. Former friends, the few she had known during her time as governess to the Ashford children, now looked upon her with such contempt that she had learned to keep her gaze fixed firmly on the ground wherever she walked. She had lost her position, her income, her dignity, and worst of all, her sense of self. The woman she had been, warm and optimistic and devoted to her young charges, had been incinerated just as surely as those poor souls in the East Wing. But what Amelia did not know, what no one in the village could have suspected, was that the Duke of Ashford himself had begun to harbour doubts. Alexander Ashford, 5th Duke of Ashford, had returned from his diplomatic mission in Vienna 3 months after the fire, arriving home to find his estate in mourning and his former governess in disgrace. He had accepted the official account without question at first, grief-stricken over the loss of so many loyal servants and traumatized by the near loss of his 2 children, who had been evacuated just in time. But Alexander was a man trained in observation, a skilled negotiator who had served the crown in delicate matters of international relations, and something about the case had never quite settled in his mind. It began with small inconsistencies. The fire marshal's report stated that the blaze originated in the library on the 2nd floor of the East Wing, where Miss Thornwell had allegedly been reading late into the evening. Yet Alexander remembered that the library had been undergoing repairs that week, the books temporarily relocated to the morning room, and access restricted by his own orders. Then there was the matter of the testimonies. 3 servants had sworn they saw Amelia leaving the East Wing just before the fire began, yet their descriptions of what she had been wearing contradicted each other wildly. One claimed she wore a blue day dress. Another insisted it was her black governess uniform, and the third swore she had been in a white nightgown. The Duke had dismissed these discrepancies initially, attributing them to the chaos and trauma of that night. But as months passed and he found himself unable to shake a gnawing sense of injustice, Alexander began his own quiet investigation. He started by reviewing the original magistrate's report, then moved on to interviewing staff members who had not been called to testify. What he discovered in those careful, discreet conversations made his blood run cold. It was a grey November morning when the Duke first sought out Amelia Thornwell directly. He had learned she was living in the old groundskeeper's cottage, surviving on what little she could forage from the estate's abandoned kitchen gardens. The path through the woods was overgrown, and frost clung to the bare branches overhead. When he emerged into the small clearing where the cottage stood, he saw her immediately, kneeling beside a struggling vegetable patch, her dress threadbare and her face gaunt with hunger and sorrow. She looked up at the sound of his approach, and for a moment their eyes met. Alexander saw in her gaze something he had not expected, not shame or defiance, but a profound weariness, as though she had long ago stopped fighting and simply accepted her role as the village pariah. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her dress, and curtsied with a mechanical precision that spoke of years of training now rendered hollow by circumstance. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I did not expect to see you here." Alexander removed his hat, a gesture of respect that clearly surprised her. "Miss Thornwell, I have come to speak with you about the fire. I have reason to believe there are aspects of that night that have not been properly examined." The transformation in her expression was immediate and heartbreaking. Hope flickered in her eyes like a candle flame in a draught, tentative and fragile. "Your Grace, I have told my account to everyone who would listen, and no one believes me. Why would you be different?" "Because I have reviewed the evidence, and it does not align with what I know to be true about the circumstances of that evening." He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Thornwell, I do not believe you set that fire. Moreover, I believe someone went to great lengths to ensure you would be blamed for it." Amelia's legs seemed to give way beneath her, and she sat down heavily on the cottage's front step. Tears began to stream down her face, not tears of joy, but of profound relief, the kind that comes when a crushing weight is finally acknowledged by another human soul. "I tried to save them," she whispered. "I heard the screams, and I ran toward the fire, not away from it. I pulled 3 people out before the smoke overcame me. But when I woke in the hospital, I was told I was responsible. The magistrate said there was evidence, witnesses, proof of my negligence." Alexander crouched down before her, his expression intent. "Tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, no matter how small or seemingly irrelevant." And so Amelia began to speak, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the events of that terrible evening. She had been in the nursery with the Duke's children, reading them a bedtime story, when she smelled smoke. She had immediately taken the children to the garden through the servants' staircase, then ran back inside to raise the alarm. She found the housekeeper, Mrs. Crawford, and together they began evacuating guests and servants. The fire spread with unnatural speed, as though it had been fed by something more than just wood and fabric. When Amelia tried to reach the east wing to ensure everyone had escaped, she found the main corridor blocked by fallen timber. She circled around through the conservatory and managed to pull 3 chambermaids from a smoke-filled room before collapsing. "I woke 2 days later to find constables at my bedside," Amelia said, her voice breaking. "They said a candelabra had been found in the library overturned, with candle wax that matched a set from my personal chamber. They said 3 servants testified they saw me leaving the east wing just as the fire began. They said I must have been reading by candlelight and fell asleep, that my negligence killed 37 people." "But you were not in the library that night," Alexander said quietly. "I was not. The library was closed for repairs. I had not been inside it for a week, but no one believed me. The evidence was too compelling, they said. The testimonies too consistent." Alexander stood and began to pace, his mind working through the implications. Someone placed that candelabra there. Someone coached those servants to give false testimony. Someone wanted you to be blamed for a fire they themselves set. He turned to face her. "Miss Thornwell, who would benefit from your disgrace?" Amelia looked up at him, confusion evident on her face. "Benefit? Your Grace, I am nobody. I have no family, no fortune, no connections. I was simply a governess." "But you were the governess to my children," Alexander said slowly, realization dawning. You were in a position of trust, with access to the family, knowledge of the household routines, and the affection of my son and daughter. If someone wanted to strike at me, to destabilize my household, or to clear the way for their own advancement, they would need to remove you first." He saw the moment understanding came to her. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. "No, no, you cannot be suggesting—" "I am not suggesting anything yet," Alexander interrupted. "But I intend to find the truth, Miss Thornwell, and I suspect it will lead me somewhere I do not wish to go." What the Duke did not say aloud was that his suspicions had already begun to crystallize around one particular person, someone so close to him that the very thought made him feel sick. His cousin, Richard Ashford, had been managing the estate during Alexander's absence in Vienna. Richard stood to inherit the dukedom if anything happened to Alexander and his children, and Richard had been the one who first brought the evidence against Amelia to the magistrate. The investigation that followed was conducted with utmost discretion. Alexander could not risk alerting the true culprit before he had gathered sufficient proof. He began by tracking down the 3 servants who had testified against Amelia. The first, a housemaid named Mary, had left service immediately after the fire and moved to London. Alexander sent his most trusted valet to find her. The second, a footman named Thomas, had been dismissed for drunkenness 6 months later and was now working at an inn in Manchester. The third, a groom named William, had died in a riding accident under circumstances that struck Alexander as suspiciously convenient. When his valet returned from London with Mary, the young woman was terrified. She had been living in a tiny room in Whitechapel, working as a seamstress for barely enough to survive. When confronted by the Duke himself, she broke down almost immediately. "I lied," she sobbed. "God forgive me. I lied at the inquest. Mr. Richard paid me £50 and promised me a position in London if I testified against Miss Thornwell. He said she was a dangerous woman who had put the children at risk, and that it was my duty to ensure she faced justice. I was scared, Your Grace. My mother was dying, and I needed the money for her medicine. I did not know it would ruin Miss Thornwell's life. I thought there would be other evidence, real evidence, and that my testimony would simply confirm what was already known." Alexander felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "What were you instructed to say?" "That I saw Miss Thornwell leaving the East Wing at 11:15, carrying a candelabra, and that she looked distressed. But, Your Grace, I was not even working that night. I had been given the evening off to visit my mother. I was not at the manor when the fire started." The footman Thomas told a similar story when Alexander's men tracked him down in Manchester. Richard had paid him £30 and promised him a recommendation for a position at another estate. The testimony had been entirely fabricated. Thomas had not witnessed Amelia anywhere near the East Wing that night. With this evidence in hand, Alexander knew he had to confront his cousin, but he also knew he needed more. Paid testimonies could be explained away as the desperate acts of servants seeking reward. He needed physical evidence, something that would prove beyond doubt that Richard had not only framed Amelia, but had actually set the fire himself. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper who had survived the fire, requested an audience with the Duke. She was an elderly woman now, her health never having fully recovered from the smoke inhalation, and she was confined to a bath chair. But her mind remained sharp, and she had information that she had been too frightened to share before. "Your Grace," she said, her voice thin but determined, "I have lived with guilt these 2 years, and I can bear it no longer. The night of the fire, I saw something that I did not report to the magistrate. I saw Mr. Richard in the East Wing corridor just minutes before the blaze began. He was carrying a container of some kind, and he looked furtive. When he saw me, he claimed he was checking that the wing was secured for the night, but Your Grace, it was not his responsibility to do so. That was my duty." "Why did you not come forward with this information?" Alexander asked, though he could already guess the answer. "Because Mr. Richard came to see me while I was recovering in the hospital. He told me that if I said anything about seeing him that night, he would ensure I was blamed as an accomplice. He said I would hang alongside Miss Thornwell. I was a coward, Your Grace. I have been a coward every day since, watching that poor girl suffer for a crime I knew in my heart she did not commit." Alexander took the elderly woman's hand gently. "You are being brave now, Mrs. Crawford. That is what matters." Armed with this testimony and the confessions of the paid witnesses, Alexander finally had enough to act. But before he confronted Richard directly, he needed to search his cousin's private chambers. What he found there turned his blood to ice. Hidden in a locked drawer in Richard's desk was a detailed accounting book, the kind used to track business expenses. In it, Richard had meticulously recorded every payment made to witnesses, every bribe delivered to ensure the investigation went in the desired direction. But more damning still was a letter, written in Richard's own hand, addressed to an associate in London. In it, Richard described his plan with chilling clarity. "The fire must appear to be an accident caused by negligence," the letter read. "The governess is the perfect scapegoat. No family, no connections, and already disliked by some of the staff for her strict management of the children. Once she is blamed and removed, the children will need a new guardian during Alexander's frequent absences. I will be appointed by the courts, given Alexander's trust in me and my position as next in line. From there, it will be a simple matter to arrange more permanent solutions. The children are young and fragile. Accidents happen." Alexander sat at his cousin's desk, the letter trembling in his hands, and felt a rage so profound it threatened to consume him. Richard had not only committed mass murder and destroyed an innocent woman's life, but he had also been planning to harm, perhaps even kill, Alexander's beloved children. The enormity of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. The Duke's next actions were swift and decisive. He summoned the magistrate, the fire marshal, and the chief constable to Ashford Manor. He also sent for Amelia Thornwell, though he did not explain why. When she arrived, confused and frightened, she was shown to a private drawing room and asked to wait. The confrontation took place in the Duke's study, with all the relevant officials present, as well as Mrs. Crawford and the two witnesses who had recanted their testimonies. Richard was summoned under the pretense of discussing estate business. When he entered and saw the assembled group, his expression flickered with alarm before settling into a mask of aristocratic composure. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this gathering?" Richard asked, his tone carefully neutral. "The meaning, cousin, is justice," Alexander replied. He held up the letter and the accounting book. "I have discovered the truth about the fire that destroyed the East Wing. I know that you set that fire deliberately. I know that you paid witnesses to give false testimony against Miss Thornwell. And I know that you did so as part of a scheme to gain control of my children and ultimately my title." Richard's face went through a rapid series of changes: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, defiance. "That is a preposterous accusation. You have no proof." "I have your own records," Alexander said, his voice cold as winter frost. "I have witnesses who have confessed to accepting payment from you. I have Mrs. Crawford's testimony that she saw you in the East Wing moments before the fire began. And I have this letter, written in your own hand, detailing your plans." The magistrate stepped forward, examining the documents Alexander provided. His expression grew increasingly grave as he read. "Mr. Richard Ashford," he said formally, "these are serious charges. Murder, arson, conspiracy, and attempted murder of minors. You will need to answer for them." Richard's composure finally cracked. You fool, Alexander. Do you know what it is like to be the spare, always standing in the shadow of your title? I have managed this estate for you, handled your affairs, solved your problems, and for what? A pittance of an allowance and the knowledge that I will never be anything more than your inferior. The fire was necessary. It was meant to show your incompetence, to prove that the estate needed stronger leadership. The governess was collateral damage, and frankly, she should be honored to have served such a greater purpose. The room fell silent at this confession. Even Richard seemed to realize he had said too much. His face paled as he looked around at the witnesses, all of whom were staring at him with expressions of horror and disgust. You killed 37 people for your ambition, Alexander said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. You destroyed an innocent woman's life? You planned to murder my children? They are obstacles, Richard said, and there was something unhinged in his eyes now. Just as you are an obstacle. England needs strong men leading her great houses, not diplomats who spend their time abroad while their estates crumble. Oh, the constables moved forward to restrain Richard, who struggled briefly before realizing the futility of resistance. As they led him away, he turned back to Alexander. You will regret this. The scandal will destroy you. The Ashford name will be dragged through the mud. The Ashford name was already in the mud, Alexander replied quietly. You put it there when you murdered innocent people and blamed the innocent. Whatever scandal comes now is nothing compared to the evil you have done. After Richard was removed, Alexander turned to find Amelia standing in the doorway. She must have heard everything. Tears streamed down her face, but these were different from the tears of despair he had seen before. These were tears of vindication, of relief, of a burden finally lifted. Miss Thornwell, Alexander said, crossing to her, I owe you an apology that words cannot adequately express. You were failed by justice, by society, and by me. I should have investigated sooner. I should have questioned the convenient narrative. 37 people died, and you have suffered for 2 years, and the blame for all of it rests with my own blood. Amelia shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was stronger than Alexander had yet heard it. Your Grace, you did what others would not. You sought the truth even when it led you to a person you loved. That takes a courage and integrity I did not dare hope existed in this world anymore. The magistrate approached them both. Miss Thornwell, on behalf of the county of Derbyshire and the Crown, I extend my sincerest apologies. A grave injustice was done to you. Your name will be cleared immediately, and restitution will be made for your suffering. In the days that followed, the story spread through Derbyshire like wildfire. Richard Ashford was formally charged with multiple counts of murder, arson, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including his own confession before witnesses. The trial, when it came, was swift. Richard was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to hang. But the more important story, at least to those who had condemned Amelia so readily, was the revelation of her innocence. The same newspapers that had called her a murderer now praised her as a hero who had risked her life to save others. The vicar, who had refused to meet her eyes, delivered a sermon about false judgment and the importance of seeking truth. The shopkeeper who had denied her bread sent a basket of food with an apology note, and the townspeople who had crossed the street to avoid her now stopped to offer their regrets, though Amelia found these sudden reversals almost as painful as the original condemnation. Alexander insisted that Amelia be compensated for her suffering. He arranged for a generous settlement from the estate, enough that she would never need to work again if she chose not to. He also offered to restore her position as governess, though he understood if she no longer wished to remain at Ashford Manor, given all that had happened there. Amelia's response surprised him. Your Grace, I would be honored to return to your service, but not as a governess. Those children need stability and love, not someone who reminds them of the terrible events that nearly orphaned them. But if you would permit it, I would like to establish a school in the village, a place where children of all classes could learn together. I have seen what ignorance and prejudice can do. Perhaps education could be a guard against such evils in the future." Alexander was moved by her vision and immediately agreed to fund the project. Within 6 months, the Thornwell School opened its doors in a renovated building on the Ashford estate. Amelia proved to be a gifted administrator and teacher, and her school quickly gained a reputation for excellence and compassion. But something else had begun to develop between Amelia and Alexander, something neither of them had anticipated. During the investigation and its aftermath, they'd spent many hours together talking not just about the case, but about their lives, their hopes, their sorrows. Alexander found in Amelia a kindness and wisdom that his late wife, who had died giving birth to their second child, had also possessed. And Amelia found in Alexander a protector and partner, someone who saw her not as a victim, but as a woman of strength and purpose. Their courtship, when it began, was the subject of much gossip in Derbyshire. A duke marrying a former governess of no family or fortune was scandalous enough. That this same governess had been falsely accused of murder made the story even more sensational. But Alexander cared nothing for gossip. He had learned, through the terrible events surrounding the fire, that reputation and social standing meant nothing compared to character and truth. They married in a quiet ceremony at the Ashford Estate Chapel, with only the closest family and friends in attendance. The Duke's children, who had never stopped believing in Amelia's innocence, served as flower girl and ring bearer. Mrs. Crawford, despite her frail health, attended in her bath chair, weeping tears of joy. And the villagers, who had once shunned Amelia so cruelly, lined the road to the chapel to cheer as the newlyweds emerged. The scandal of Richard's crimes never quite faded. The Ashford name was indeed dragged through the newspapers, but as Alexander had told his cousin, the scandal of truth and justice was far preferable to the scandal of hidden evil. Some members of society cut the Duke and his new Duchess, unable to accept the unconventional marriage, or perhaps uncomfortable with the reminder of their own failures of judgment. But many more rallied to their support, impressed by Alexander's integrity and moved by Amelia's grace. The Thornwell School flourished under Amelia's guidance, and over the years it educated hundreds of children, many of whom went on to lives they could never have imagined without that opportunity. Amelia established scholarships for the poorest students and insisted that girls receive the same rigorous education as boys. She became known throughout England as a pioneering educator and a vocal advocate for justice reform. As for Alexander, he continued his service to the crown, but he was more selective about his absences. Unwilling to leave his family for extended periods, he implemented reforms on his estate, improving conditions for workers and establishing protections to prevent abuses of power. The fire and its aftermath had shown him how easily authority could be corrupted and how important it was for those in positions of privilege to remain vigilant and humble. On the second anniversary of their marriage, Amelia and Alexander stood together at the site where the East Wing had once stood. It had been rebuilt not as it was, but as a memorial and community centre, with a plaque listing the names of all 37 victims of the fire. Fresh flowers were always placed there by someone from the village, a reminder that those lives would not be forgotten. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might be if you had not doubted the official account?" Amelia asked, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. She was carrying their first child. Alexander drew her close, his arms protective around her. "I think about it often. I think how close I came to allowing an innocent woman to suffer while a monster walked free. It haunts me that I did not act sooner, that you endured 2 years of torment before I found the courage to question what I had been told." "But you did find that courage," Amelia said softly. That is what matters. You chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. So many people, when confronted with uncomfortable facts that implicate those they love, choose to look away. You did not. Neither did you, Alexander replied. You could have become bitter, could have let hatred consume you. Instead, you turned your suffering into purpose. You are the strongest person I have ever known. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ghosts of what had been and the promise of what would be. The past could not be changed, and the scars would never fully fade. But out of tragedy and injustice had come truth, and from truth had come healing, and from healing had come love. Amelia had learned that resilience was not about being unbreakable, but about choosing to rebuild even after being shattered. She had learned that reputation was fleeting, but character was eternal. And she had learned that sometimes the darkest nights give way to dawns more beautiful than anything you could have imagined. For Alexander, the lessons were equally profound. He had learned that duty included the duty to question, to investigate, to never accept easy answers when those answers harmed the innocent. He had learned that love could be found in unexpected places, and that the most valuable partners were those who had been tested by fire and emerged with their compassion intact. The village of Ashford, too, had learned painful lessons about mob mentality, about the ease with which people could turn against one of their own, and about the importance of seeking truth before passing judgment. The transformation was not immediate or complete. Some remained convinced of their own righteousness, even in the face of evidence, but many others experienced genuine remorse and worked to ensure that such an injustice would never happen again in their community. As the years passed, the story of Amelia Thornwell became something of a legend in Derbyshire. It was told to children as a cautionary tale about false accusations, and to adults as a reminder of the importance of seeking truth. The Thornwell School produced generation after generation of students who carried forward Amelia's values of compassion, critical thinking, and justice. Richard Ashford's name, by contrast, became synonymous with betrayal and evil. His execution had been attended by hundreds, many of whom had lost loved ones in the fire he set. There was no sympathy for him, no redemption arc for a man who had murdered innocents for ambition and shown no genuine remorse even at the end. On summer evenings, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford would walk through the gardens of their estate, their children playing nearby, and marvel at the strange path that had brought them together, a path paved with tragedy and injustice, but one that had ultimately led to something beautiful and true. Amelia never forgot those 2 years of isolation and condemnation. The memories remained sharp, a reminder of how quickly one's life could be destroyed by lies and how slowly truth sometimes moved. But she also remembered the moment when the Duke first came to her cottage, when hope rekindled in her heart, when she realized she had not been abandoned by all of humanity. That memory sustained her through difficult times, and reminded her always to extend grace to others who were suffering under the weight of false accusations. The fire and its aftermath became a defining event, not just for Amelia and Alexander, but for everyone connected to Ashford Manor. It exposed the fragility of justice, the corruptibility of witnesses, and the danger of accepting convenient narratives without question. But it also demonstrated the power of one person refusing to ignore their doubts, of choosing integrity over ease. In the end, Amelia Thornwell's story was not primarily about suffering, though she suffered greatly. It was not primarily about injustice, though she experienced terrible injustice. It was about the human capacity for redemption, the importance of seeking truth even when it is painful, and the transformative power of love that sees beyond reputation to the character beneath. She had been hated by an entire community, blamed for deaths she did not cause, stripped of her dignity and her future, and yet she had survived. More than survived, she had rebuilt her life into something meaningful and beautiful. She had founded a school that changed hundreds of lives. She had married a man who valued her for her mind and spirit, not her social standing. And she had learned that sometimes the monsters are not who we think they are, and sometimes the heroes are the ones everyone else has condemned. The Duke of Ashford, for his part, never regretted his decision to investigate the fire, even though it led him to discover that his own cousin was a murderer. The truth, however painful, was always preferable to living with a lie. And the love he found with Amelia was a gift he had never expected, a grace note in the midst of tragedy. Years later, when their children were grown, and the Thornwell School had expanded to multiple locations throughout England, Amelia would sometimes receive letters from people she had never met, people who had heard her story and been inspired to question injustices in their own communities, people who had been falsely accused and found hope in knowing that truth, though sometimes delayed, could still prevail. People who had learned to look beyond reputation and prejudice to see the humanity in others. These letters reminded Amelia that her suffering had not been meaningless. It had become a beacon for others, a testament to the possibility of redemption and the importance of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. She had been broken by what happened to her, but she had chosen to let the broken places heal into something stronger than they had been before. The tale of Amelia Thornwell and the Duke of Ashford became, in time, a story told throughout England. A story about justice delayed but not denied. A story about the courage it takes to question authority and seek truth. A story about finding love in unexpected places and building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. And most importantly, a story about remembering that every person condemned by society might be innocent, and every reputation destroyed might hide a deeper truth waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to the Manor Tales and leaving a like on this video. Your support helps us bring more stories to life, and we are deeply grateful to share these narratives of courage, redemption, and the enduring power of truth with you.